been so good to study about Daniel and those other guys with him because they are men who really stood for things. They stood out in the crowd. They stood firm for their convictions. They stood up to leadership, but in a very godly and humble and cooperative way, yet always standing for the truth. Well, today we're going to see Daniel standing up for some very important things in his life. The first 6 chapters of Daniel follow a group of those Israelites. We've talked about them. They were young men who were fighting to stay loyal and faithful and full of integrity before God, despite the challenges that came with living as captives in a foreign kingdom. Among other things, there were constant threats of imprisonment or death for their faith. So, in our time together today, we are going to think about faithfulness and integrity and the importance of those two things in our daily lives as we seek to be followers of Jesus Christ. Daniel was empowered in his pursuit of God through a consistent prayer life, and his walk with God led him to incredible favors. But as you will see, it also won him a lot of jealous enemies. Well, as we talk about prayer, we see it's really about two things. It's about communication, and it's about power in our lives. So first, let's talk about communication. Now, I'm going to use an illustration that's going to really date me because it's a very outdated question, but I'd still like to use it to illustrate a point. And here is that question. Have you ever tried to talk to someone through a walkie-talkie system who didn't know how to operate it? Now, I know, again, I'm dating myself, but work with me on this, okay? In a walkie-talkie system, they might not hold down the button long enough, and you miss part of what they're trying to say to you. Or the other person may hold the button down all the time, and they could never hear what you have to say. Well, the reason I wanted to use that illustration is because we can at times tend to treat prayer like a one-way conversation, where we talk and God listens, and we're the one holding down the button the entire time. But scriptural examples of prayer include not only asking God for our needs and giving Him thanks, but also asking questions and then sitting back and listening and letting God give us His answers. See, that's called communication. It's two-way. We each speaking to each other. Now, let's think together for a moment about the second component of prayer, which is power. Most of the things in our houses work because of power. We call it electricity, but it's an invisible power that gives us visible privileges. You see, electricity powers our lights, our TVs, our toasters, our electric ovens, and hundreds of other things in our homes, and all of that and so much more is working in our house because we have this invisible power shooting through our homes. But none of those things work, even though they have access to electricity, until we flip on a switch of some kind, We have to make a connection before the stuff that's there works. Well, prayer is like electricity, because it empowers us by connecting us to the source of that power. Prayer always involves faith, and faith always turns God on. Hebrews 11:6 tells us, and it's impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to Him must believe that God exists and that He rewards those who sincerely seek Him. Well, Daniel understood this amazing communication and this amazing power of prayer, and he courageously obeyed God in spite of being different and being even persecuted for it. He was persistent in prayer. It was his habit. And what is remarkable in his behavior is not so much that a crisis would drive him to his knees, but rather that he didn't break his regular routine of prayer. He openly prayed to God every day, even after a law was passed saying, no citizen can pray to anyone but the king. He didn't hide himself away in an inner room to prayer in the hope of remaining undiscovered. And he also didn't cry out to God for deliverance from this unjust edict of the king. He just kept on praying, even with the windows open, where people could see him if they chose to. And so now, with that as an introduction to our study today, right here's a good time for us to stop and to discuss a very important question. When Daniel was thrown into the lion's den as a punishment for continuing to pray to the God of Israel, the king of Babylon expressed his sincere hope that Daniel's God would save him, since Daniel had been a man of faithfulness and integrity in the kingdom. After many years of seeing Daniel consistently live out his beliefs, the pagan king of Babylon was starting to soften toward the idea that Daniel's God was the living God. And it's really interesting. People may not like our beliefs. They may not like our different lifestyles, but they're still drawn to watch us. And if we walk with courage and integrity, we will be walking miracles, testimonies of the reality of God, because those qualities are truly rare in our society that has increasingly moved away from the truth of a living God. We don't have to seek out positions of influence in order to evangelize. We just live our lives faithfully, day in and day out, as citizens of another kingdom. And you know what? People will notice. They may even come to know our God as their own. You see, all Daniel had to do to evangelize was trust God and remain faithful. He didn't need a long or articulate speech. He just needed obedience. And some of us may believe sharing our faith is a big and scary task, but God will never leave us without the power to communicate His truth. And one of those most powerful ways is by taking our trust, our faithfulness, and our integrity and turning it into a testimony. Daniel's obedience, his trust in the Lord, ultimately, over a period of years, it led a nation to worship the one true God. If we obey God, even if we might be ostracized for it, He will receive glory from our lives, and He can use our obedience to stir up questions of faith in the people around us, even bringing some of them to know Him because of it. Tim Keller once made a very powerful statement about prayer. He said, prayer is how God gives us so many of the unimaginable things He has and desires for us. Prayer is the way we know God and the way we treat God as God. Prayer is simply, and this is so cool, because he closes off the statement by saying prayer is simply the key to everything we need to do and be in life. Well, Daniel 6:10 summarizes Daniel's faithfulness and integrity. It says this: "But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down," and I love these words, "as usual." In other words, he had a holy habit. He prayed 3 times a day. And his prayer was focused on the Lord, and he did it every day. And so he went back, even though the king said you can't do it, he went back, and as usual, in his upstairs room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he prayed 3 times a day. And here's the other key words: just as he had always done. And in his prayers, he gave thanks to his God. Well, we've seen some important teaching and understandings. And I hope that you and I will apply them to our lives this week. So let's close off our time today with these two very important questions.